This episode is sponsored by VIVARAYS, the only eyewear company that truly understands your biology. VIVARAYS are advanced blue light glasses designed with circadian biology in mind. Unlike typical blue blockers, they filter light in harmony with your body's natural rhythms, helping you sleep deeper, feel more energized, and protect your long-term health. We love companies that support biology-backed wellness, and VIVARAYS is leading the way. Use code QUANTUMHEALTHY at vivarays.com to save 15% and support your sleep, focus, and natural energy the way nature intended. Enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Quantum Healthy podcast. I'm Andeea, a licensed addiction counselor, and along with my co-host, Laura Kissmann, a quantum nutritionist, we will be inviting expert scientists, clinicians, survivors, and thrivers to distill their pearls of wisdom attained from applying quantum biology to their fields of research and everyday lives. Our goal is to bring you easy to understand principles and practices about the study of light, water, and magnetism so you can take your health into your own hands. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Quantum Healthy podcast. Today we have a guest all the way from the Philippines, Jack Schroder. Welcome to the podcast, Jack.
Thanks for having me. As you can see, I look very Filipino, so originally from the Philippines. But good to be here. Very good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So Jack is a quantum nutritionist and a health optimization coach and a student of quantum biology. He coaches clients to reach their peak physical and mental state beyond the typical medical advice that we're typically given. He's an expert on men's hormonal health. He's got a Skool platform where he also teaches decentralized health and quantum biology in a very affordable way. And I know that we'll ask you to share your story, but I know that you were an electrical linesman and you're originally from Australia. And yeah, from that to quantum biology, tell us a little bit how you got here.
Yeah, good question. So, my previous job, I was always in the construction industry, and most of that was around like electrical work. So I'd work on like underground power lines, so it's called like cable jointing, and then I'd progress to like working on overhead power lines. So I'd climb up the poles and work on it was pretty crazy, like a little monkey just like up there working on like live electricity and stuff. But I don't know if it's the same in America. I assume it is, but the culture around those industries is very toxic. Lots of toxic masculinity, lots of drugs and alcohol, and just like a very toxic environment to be in, to be honest with you. I'm not saying that's like the main driver of my health issue, but I don't think like being there from 7 to 3 every single day, sometimes on weekends as well, and sometimes longer, is too great for your health. I think it's very important who you have around your circle. But during that time, COVID was happening, and then I had a bunch of health issues, basically. There was, as we mentioned before, we started hitting record, that there is some drug and alcohol use, quite excessive, I would say, but very much normalized where I'm from. And then on top of that was just like low testosterone, some definite gut issues. Looking back at my blood work now, I definitely see there was a lot of shit going wrong if I matched it to the symptoms. So I would have suspected like some decent gut issues, sleep apnea, a lot of things. And yeah, it was probably like my rock bottom. I reckon there was some times where I felt not like suicidal, but like in terms of, what's the point of living? Like in a way, like if I just continued to feel like this. And it was a very shit feeling. And I think it would just go from week to week where I would go out on a weekend and completely fuck myself up, basically. And then throughout the week, I'd slowly start to feel better. And by Thursday, Friday, I'll be like, oh, I'm okay. I'm all good again. I can justify like going out again. And that was like the vicious cycle that I think a lot of people get stuck in. And I think COVID and then also my health issues was a straw that broke the camel's back in terms of I wasn't getting any health from the centralized standpoint with endocrinologists, GPs, and things of that nature. And then I just started taking responsibility for my own health. And that's the only time where I actually started to build momentum and started to heal and actually optimize my health, which was probably a long journey, probably still working through it now. I think as humans, we're human beings. I think that being is important for a reason, that we are constantly shifting and trying to unlock the best version of ourselves. And I think there's constant leveling up around that. Yeah, I basically started to study and learn a lot about my body, a lot about just like health in general. I did a few courses, and then I just thought, I think it was around 2021 whilst all this shit was going down in COVID, and it was extremely bad in Australia, especially where I was from in Melbourne. It was like we were in North Korea or something,
It was
and
the worst in the planet.
worst in the planet. Yeah. It was an absolute joke, and it's made me see Australia from a different lens now. Hence why, partially the reason why I'm not there anymore, to tell you the truth. But basically, I just said to myself around that time, I'm going to do whatever it takes to be able to create the life that I want to live, however hard or however much I need to hustle. I'm going to get there. And that's what I'm trying to do at the moment, where I essentially saved up a lot of money from my old job, which was a blessing in disguise. The job came with a lot of danger, but then danger money comes on top of that, lots of overtime and going on call and all that kind of stuff. So I had lots of money, or not lots of money, but like enough money to sustain a year or two without, essentially, if I didn't get any clients or anything, it would be okay. And yeah, it was probably, I just brought a little backpack. It was about 7 or 8 kilograms. And I would just went to Asia, lived there for 6 months and hopped around, then went to South America, hopped around there for 6 months. Pretty much spoke fluent Spanish by the end of it, which was pretty cool. And then I went back to Asia, and here I am now, probably 2.5 years later, currently living in the Philippines. And I've been here for probably a good 6 months, to tell you the truth. So probably the most stable I've been in the last few years, which has been a bit challenging because it became a part of my identity just to kind of like hop around. But I think at a certain time, you do need to find that stability and feel grounded. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm on this beautiful island in the Philippines. It's pretty raw here. I can't even get cell data, to tell you the truth. Internet sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. Fortunately, like, we've got a generator here, so if the internet does go out, FYI, like, I'll be back in 2 minutes. But yeah, that's me right now. And I'm health coaching, working as a nutritionist with clients. Generally, my clients are very much chronic conditions at the moment. So lots of people that have seen a lot of practitioners, naturopaths, doctors, functional doctors, other health coaches, and they just can't seem to figure out what's going on. And you mentioned like that I'm a quantum health coach, nutritionist. Yeah, I don't see myself as that anymore. I've gone more broad spectrum in terms of looking at the gut, blood work, nervous system, because I really think that's what you need in order to truly heal, is to understand every single concept. As overwhelming as it is, it's something that I'm trying to learn and comprehend. And obviously it takes a lot of time, but that's where I'm at around clients. And then, as you mentioned, I've got like a Skool community as well for people who want to learn, but also people who want to optimize their health with a low ticket option, because I'm in there replying every 24 hours, assessing blood work, going over symptoms, and just guiding them in the right direction with all the blogs and webinars and protocols I have in there. Yeah, that's me up until this point. If you need me to dissect it any further, feel free.
Oh, we will. Okay, so tiny backpack. What's in your, Andy and I were talking about this earlier. What do you carry in that backpack? I'm assuming a laptop.
Yeah, so even before that, so that was technically the second backpack, was like a 7 or 8 kilo backpack. The first one was probably about 5 or 6 kilograms, which is about, what would that be, like 10 or 11 pounds. It was literally like a 15-liter backpack. So it's like this 15-liter like lightweight backpack that had drink holder slots and then like an elastic one at the front. So I just stuffed as much shit in there, and I used to sometimes hang shit off it. But yeah, it was like a laptop. I had 4 pairs of merino wool underwear, which I could wash easily. Had a few, like, because I was in the tropics for the most part, I didn't really wear a shirt for probably 2 years, to be honest with you. So I just had like one t-shirt and a few tank tops, one button-up shirt that I'd wear like when I was traveling. Laptop stand, which I'm using right now, that I still just think it's like the best ROI ever. Laptop. I think I had a keyboard and mouse as well, but I didn't really use it that much, to tell you the truth. It was probably just like a waste of space. And then just toiletries, honestly. Yeah, it was very liberating. Like, I've never really done anything like that before. And I honestly recommend it, to be honest with you. Like, even if it's just for a month, it's like a real challenge, and it makes you realize how little you really need as a human being. And I think ancestrally, we're probably a bit more nomadic. So it had that modern nomadic vibe to it. And yeah, it was just like a very liberating and amazing part of my journey.
And which country, like I know you're in the Philippines now. I think you were in Thailand. What's been the order? You left Australia. Where'd you go for this is
Okay.
2.5 years, right? On the road?
Yeah, I went to Bali, Indonesia. Oh no, Malaysia, then Indonesia, then Thailand, then Vietnam, then back to Thailand. I think South Korea was in there as well. Then to United States for a little bit, then to Argentina, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Mexico, back to Vietnam for 3 months, went back to Bali for a month, went to Australia to see my family after a year and a half because they were nagging me, which is completely understandable at that stage. And then back to Thailand, Cambodia, back to Thailand, and now the Philippines. I think I went to Vietnam 1 month this year as well. in between. But yeah, it seems like Philippines is home for now. Like I've got a beautiful girlfriend here as well. And it makes life easier when she speaks the language as well. And yeah, it's just like a very raw place, to be honest with you. I think it's probably my favorite place from like a geometric standpoint in terms of like being close to family on a time zone basis, like in Australia. But then it's also got lots of access to other places. And I'll tell you, like shares a lot of similarities to places in Central America, just because of like I suppose the rawness of it, but then also like the Spaniards did colonize it. So it does have a bit of that vibe there, which I honestly really like because I really love like Central America as well. So that's the order, I believe, more or less.
I'm a huge fan of we've been to Costa Rica.
Yeah.
Nicaragua's on the list. Haven't got there yet. We've been to Panama. And yeah,
Yeah.
so I hear you, but I was trying to figure out where does the Spanish? I know there's some Spanish in the Philippines, but I was thinking about the rest of the Far East. It's not really Spanish.
The rest of what, sorry?
The Far East, how you had learned Spanish. I was thinking you'd be learning different languages, but
Yeah.
you're now fluent in Spanish.
Yeah, I haven't spoken it for a year or so. I think like just as I left Mexico to go back to Asia, I was like on it. I was pretty good. I would say 90% there. Listen, read, write. Yeah, like obviously like different accents were a bit stronger and it made it more difficult. But yeah, I was learning it like prior for 5 years, like on and off. So that was really beneficial. And then yeah, I just like to try and learn like Vietnamese or Thai. It is insane. There's 8 different tones. Thai isn't even like a normal alphabet. So it's pretty crazy to even try. Like I've tried, but yeah, I think if I'm going to learn a language here, it's going to be probably Tagalog in the Philippines because that actually has a little bit of Spanish in there. So I can speak like maybe 10% of it, maybe a bit less, but yeah, just enough to get by. But yeah, that's the main reason behind it is like I was already learning it and it's honestly a lot easier to learn than any of the Asian languages. That's for sure.
Oh my goodness. I did see a post today on Instagram. I loved it. It's you. I think it was, you started off, you said, do you see it? Or do you still need Windex? Do you know that one? Windex wipers over your glass eyes. And it's you jumping into a lagoon from a rope swing. And you mentioned, this is how I'm escaping the matrix. And I'm like,
Yes.
we all want to escape the matrix. And then my question was, is that what you're really doing here? Is escaping the matrix and getting that chance to be grounded and in sunlight and shirt off?
Yeah, I think so. And that video is actually from this island that I'm on. So it's like a very beautiful lagoon that's probably only like an hour away from our house right now. Oh, not even, probably about 40 minutes. Yeah, is that what I really want? Is that what you asked?
Yeah, that was just the question I had before talking to you. I think I have a better understanding now, but like all this traveling, is that you escaping the matrix?
Yeah, and look, I think, yeah, it probably was, but then I think it's also like escaping my identity that I was back home as well. I think there's no neglecting that.
Wow.
There's also like a part, I've been thinking about this lately, actually, like romanticizing the next place and all that. It seemed like I would do that where I'd be like grounded for a week or two and then I'd be like, oh, what's the next place? Because, yeah, I would say this ties in with the whole like dopamine and addiction thing, to be honest with you, because what is more stimulating than like flying into a new country? Everything's new, like all the plants, all the like the people, like the language, the culture, the food. It's all just like really exciting. And it's something that I've been kind of working through right now is that, yeah, like it's all good and well to do that. You can't just constantly do that for the rest of your life. I think it comes down to you have to be stimulated within yourself and have that internal happiness. And that's something that I've honestly been trying to work through because, yeah, I found myself like finding this pattern where as I said, it became my identity, like this guy with a little backpack that can just travel around. And it is amazing, to tell you the truth. Like there's so much beautiful things that come with it, but then you're missing the whole chunk of like feeling grounded and being in a beautiful home that you can actually build and not in an Airbnb that you're there for 2 weeks and the water's not working or whatever it is. And there's no stainless steel pans. It's all like non-stick or aluminium or whatever it is. Like that's the kind of stuff you have to deal with. And I suppose the lesson in there is, yeah, the grass sometimes always seems greener on the other side, but yeah, a lot of the time it isn't. And it comes down to like your internal emotional state, to be honest with you. Not sure if that answered your question, but yeah.
My husband's an airline pilot, long haul. So he's a little bit that right now is this identity to escape and have so much fun for 2, 3, 4 days. And he's like you, he explores. Small backpack on the back and heads off and hikes 15 kilometers and sees so much. And yeah, no, sounds like you might have fallen in love.
Yeah.
Who knows? That'll ground you.
I've
That
definitely fallen in love. I can confirm that.
well,
That's so
that I was going to ask you about cross addictions actually, because
Yeah.
I heard you on a podcast, and it was the first time I had heard of dynorphins. And so when you were explaining that, and I'm going to ask you to explain that to our audience right now, but right away I thought about cross addiction. And is that like it because we're just chasing the dopamine. We're looking for an external way to solve an internal problem, but there's also a lot of biology that we have to sift through. So I just want you to explain two things. You're like how you see addiction from a biophysical perspective, and then also like I want you to touch on the dynorphin piece and the socially isolated, because that is such a huge piece of addiction is isolating.
Okay, cool. So let's start with the first part around the biophysics side of things. And I'll probably tie in like the biochemistry as well, because they obviously both,
Great.
like the biophysics will rule the biochemistry, but we can't have the biochemistry without the biophysics, basically. So yeah, like this is my hypothesis around it, around what I've learnt, and like from the biophysics standpoint, because a lot of stuff in the biophysics side of things, and the quantum side of things, there is a lot of unknown still, to tell you the truth. But what we can take from a lot of stuff, a lot of data, is that a lot of disease states, and this includes like things like addiction or nervous system dysregulation in general, but then obviously like being more specific around like whether it's Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, diabetes, any condition really, like that I've researched around like a biophoton emissions, there seems to be this pattern where there is two things going on. There is biophoton emissions essentially being leaked out, and like UV light being leaked out of the system, and that doesn't necessarily correlate, oh, this person is like making endogenous UV light and harnessing it to our advantage. They're doing that. That's one thing. So we have that. And that when we connect that, that's tied to entropy, right? So if we have a rise in entropy, we have a loss of energy. And what's the highest energy wavelengths that we have? Sorry, one moment. Sorry about that. So with the light, so UV is connected to higher energy photons. So what we see from that is that a rise in entropy means a loss in energy. So from a thermodynamic standpoint, someone who has a disease or a condition is thermodynamically inefficient compared to someone that's healthy. So that's the first thing. The second thing that you see with certain conditions is that, for example, I believe like Parkinson's, I found one recently, there's like blue shifts and red shifts in the biophoton patterns. So the light signature, the biophoton signature has shifted. All right. And then when we layer in what's going on with Roland Van Wyck's research, and his research says that in one of his like recent papers, and this is what really stimulated me, not recent in terms of like from his book, Light and Shaping Life, but like past that, he spoke about that if we were able to detect biophoton patterns inside human cells, we would be able to diagnose and assess for disease before symptoms, before blood work, and before any sort of lab work. And to me, that's something that's really incredible. And I think that's what fuels me on a daily basis to learn more about the biophysics side of things, because if we can essentially plug that all into AI and have this database around like light absorption and emission spectra of every single molecule endogenously and exogenously, I think what we'll find, and then of course like measuring light emissions from like places that utilize oxygen, for example, like the mitochondria, NADPH oxidase on cell membranes, like in immune cells, as an example, we're going to find like this correlation between disease states and the biophoton emissions that are used. And I think obviously from a diagnosis standpoint, like having that early on is incredibly beneficial, like hugely beneficial, because obviously it's before symptoms. So that within itself, I think plays such a big role that we are able to literally help a whole civilization internationally, that if we're able to understand this stuff and plug it in properly, then we can heal people before it's too late. And I think that's really important. And what happens when you heal someone before it's too late? That essentially means, like from a pharmaceutical standpoint, they don't rely on any sort of pharmaceutical drugs. So that's like the first thing. Now, I'm taking you on this tangent because what I think is going on the biophysical standpoint is that with addiction is that we have leakage of UV light. It's not utilized in the system anymore. So that therefore we have this rise in entropy. And we got to remember that UV light photoactivates like aromatic amino acids like tryptophan, tyrosine, phenylalanine, histidine. And for example, let's do the most obvious one here, that tyrosine connects to dopamine. Same with phenylalanine. The main neurochemical imbalance found in most conditions, in most addictions, should I say, is going to be low dopamine. And when we have low dopamine, then we're going to seek it elsewhere because we're not making UV light endogenously and we're not getting it from an external source. And then when you look at the emission spectra of certain drugs, methamphetamine is an example, psilocybin mushrooms. Like, again, I do think there is use for that to a degree, though, to be fair. But any pharmaceutical drug or any sort of drug that's on the streets, per se, like cocaine, whatever it is, nicotine, you look at it, they all have this special ring. It's like an aromatic or a benzene style ring that literally interacts with light. So what we know and what we can take from that is that if you search like a majority of them, they all absorb UV light and emit UV light. So what I think is going on is that on that biophysical level is you're intaking a substance or a compound to try and rectify the biophoton signature that has gone AWOL because of what's going on in your mitochondria and what's going on around oxygen utilization inside that cell. That's essentially what goes on. And then you got to think like downstream of that, UV light interacts again with dopamine. It does a bunch of other things as well. We know that UV light interacts with like cholesterol, interacts with DHA. It essentially feeds energy into the system where someone is thermodynamically unstable. And that's what I think we see in disease, like on that biophysical level, is that someone is trying to replace the light that they cannot make. That's the first thing. And then on that, as I said, biochemical level, dopamine. But then when we tie in dynorphin, which again is very interesting within itself, because, and I haven't really researched this probably for a year or so to tell you the truth, but dynorphin puts the brakes on dopamine. And it also, if you think of it, like dynorphin, it acts on opioid receptors much like endorphins does, but acts on different ones. And what is fundamentally going on there, if we tie in what's going on with POMC, which again is like this peptide, which interacts with UV light, blue light, it cleaves under certain products, and UV light stimulates beta endorphin and alpha MSH, which are very important chemicals down the line that play a role within themselves around mood. But obviously alpha MSH is like a potent anti-inflammatory. It induces melanin production. Beta endorphins more disinhibiting dopaminergic neurons in the nucleus accumbens to essentially drive like that motivation, that anticipation, that reward, that pleasure. So we got all that going on. And then dynorphin by design literally inhibits what's going on with POMC. It antagonizes endorphin and the whole POMC peptide to essentially put the brakes on addiction as like a protective mechanism. But again, if we're lowering dopamine in this case, it's not like it's just one mechanism that it's doing. But of course, like it has, as I mentioned before, with POMC and this UV light that's missing, and we're not building the main semiconductor being POMC and alpha MSH and melanin down the line, you just see this whole cascade of light being completely disrupted in the system, and that reflects what's going on with your neurochemistry. I hope that made sense. I went on like pretty deep there, but basically, like to summarize all that, like on a biophysical standpoint, is like the light code is wrong inside our neurons, inside our cells, and that essentially governs what goes on with neurotransmitter release, receptor expression of those neurotransmitters, the metabolism of all of these, and everything in between, basically.
Yeah, no, those were great tangents. This is exactly what I wanted you to explain.
I can go deeper if
Yeah, that's fascinating. I really like this perspective. Now, I think about where people have trauma or they're using for a specific reason, and it's multifaceted because addiction is biopsychosocial disease. So just to clarify for everyone, we are talking about the bio piece right now, not so much the social and psychological pieces of this.
in
And
saying that,
yeah.
sorry for interrupting you. In saying that though, it does still tie into it because of how anything that puts stress on our mitochondria, on our bodies, so any sort of like social isolation or anything you mentioned there, like trauma, what it essentially does is it induces fear or stress or both, basically. And again, like fear feeds into stress. And what fundamentally happens, it shifts the way oxygen gets utilized at cytochrome C oxidase in the mitochondria. And what that does is it shifts the whole biophoton patterns because it affects the way that free radicals are made, basically. I just want to add that. And then that is the product of how those biophotons are liberated, basically. And that essentially can drive the exact mechanism that I was saying before. And I forgot to mention as well, like with that blue and red shift, like that blue shift is huge as well, because we got to remember that POMC, when it's hit by blue light by design, like in the morning where I am right now, is that you get blue, but you get very little UV. So you're getting that natural cortisol release. So what happens is blue light essentially acts on POMC to increase ACTH, which increases cortisol, and then cortisol drives that stress response, provided it can be made. But then also on top of that, it has an antagonizing effect on POMC and melanin, has an antagonizing effect on mitochondrial water, and also has an antagonizing effect on collagen. So we're downgrading the system basically from a biophysical standpoint because we're accustoming to this, like the amount of oxygen that we can use, which is based off the stress that we are facing currently on a day-to-day basis. Sorry, I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you for clarifying that.
Before we got on, just for context, everybody, Jack told us it's sunrise there and he just did a bunch of sprints and I have to cool down because I'm like full of adrenaline and it's coming through here. And I'm so glad that we've had in our past, we've done about 50 interviews. We've touched on POMC, we've touched on dopamine, we've touched on melatonin and the electron transport chain. So I'm hoping that we haven't lost everybody here because you fired a whole whack at us, but like the depth that you have thought through this through and how well you can explain it is impressive, Jack, I gotta say.
Well, thank you. I try my best. Sometimes I feel like I can be talking and then again, I think this is like naturally because I'm running around with undiagnosed ADHD here. And I think that's like what plays a big role in terms of my addictions, should I say. And obviously I can funnel it into good or bad. Like historically, it's been more bad stuff, but now it's more like I'm funneling into being hyper focused and hyper aware for 2 to 3 hour blocks of learning and intaking as much as I can because I'm passionate about it. And then I suppose it's just I'm constantly, it's a blessing and a curse, I would say. It's something that I'm like constantly thinking about because I'm just like I just want to understand it all basically. But then I think it's also like curse around that is I just don't think we can understand it all. Like the human body is just so complex and so complicated. The universe is just so complex. Like I just think it can be almost like a never-ending rabbit hole that I'm currently digging, but trying to understand that there is like limitations around certain things, especially like obviously, as I said before, with like research around biophysics in this case. But yeah.
Awesome.
We're good company with I think we're both maybe a little undiagnosed ADHD and a little hyper-focused. So
yeah, you're in good company.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little, so just to wrap this section up here, could you maybe leave people with how they can optimize their dopamine? Because yes, you are right. These systems are very complex, but I feel like at least from all my learnings, the answer of how to correct things is actually quite simple and oftentimes even free and where we don't have to spend a lot of money. What would be like the biggest needle movers for you for people to optimize their dopamine?
Honestly, like if you want to completely reset everything within a week, literally just go get your car, put a tent in there and maybe some food for a week, and then just go camping somewhere and just obviously have your phone for emergency purposes, but like literally don't use it. And that's probably the ultimate way because you'll be grounded, you'll be in a low non-ADBMF environment, you'll be with your thoughts, and it's going to be the most challenging thing ever. Like, honestly, I think that's why people who do silent retreats say it's just so difficult. And that probably adds another layer because you're literally just sitting there with your fucking eyes closed for a week straight and you can't talk to anyone. Whereas like this, you can still obviously walk around and be stimulated by nature, which again, I think obviously plays a big role around like regenerating dopamine neurons, the sensitization of receptors, the expression of them, and everything down the line, I suppose. So yeah, I would say like obviously that's the most efficient way, and obviously it's not the most realistic way for most people. If we actually go to a more realistic standpoint, if you can do that, great, that's going to be the best way. But the most realistic standpoint I would say is these things, like removing your phone and setting huge limitations, like just going on like a detox around anything that is stimulating you from a dopamine standpoint. Because again, like you could be getting as much sun as you want and doing all the right things, but if you're like still got these habits of like constantly checking your phone, whatever it is, maybe it's like vaping or smoking cigarettes or just eating like shit or watching porn, whatever it is, like you still have to remove it because it's not the fact that it's still going to be like beneficial being outside and it's still going to have a positive net effect. But I think for the most part, like it's the process of like elimination first. So it's like eliminating the main cause of what is affecting that cycle around dopamine activity. And then I think on top of that, it's just like finding other things that are going to stimulate you instead. And again, like it might be one of those things where it takes a bit of time to actually feel that stimulation, and that's by design. We've got to remember, right, that because natural or artificial dopamine sets the bar so high in terms of the actual release, the activity on like the receptors, like for example, like you look at your phone notifications, you constantly do that, you change through the applications and stuff. Like that is just so artificial in terms of, it's literally like slot machines, right? And hence why you see like people who not only have addictions to our digital cigarettes here, but also to gambling, just because it's the colors, the light, the simulation. It reels you in that little bit, but not too much that you don't want to be involved, but like enough that you want to still continue doing it, basically. And that's the art of it. And that's literally what they work off. And as I said before, like with dopamine, right? Like we have to understand, I think it's really important, like beyond what I said before, which again, to be honest with you, like you don't need to know the details. I think that we just like love to learn that stuff. But the thing with dopamine is, what was I going to say about that? So with artificial dopamine, we set the bar so high, and we have to understand that's like by design. Like we're meant to be, because dopamine is like a reinforcing neurotransmitter, we're meant to be naturally stimulated by stuff that is beneficial for us, right? Finding food or hunting, sex and love, sunlight, being in nature, learning something, like all of these things are naturally going to release dopamine. And that's a reinforcing mechanism. Okay, this is good for us. We should keep doing it, right? So when we have something that's like artificial and it's hijacked that loop, we have to essentially understand why, like the purpose behind it and why that's happening. And then the easiest thing to do is essentially remove it from us, have that, whether it's 1 week of discomfort, 4 weeks of discomfort, maybe 8 to 12 weeks of discomfort. I know for me, like my cravings for like mostly drugs would have been something that probably lasted like 12 months, to be honest with you, like until it fully diminished for the most part.
Wow.
Yeah, you just have to understand the modern world has hijacked that loop. So that's exactly why you go outside, you feel absolutely nothing in sunlight. You're like, oh, sunlight doesn't work for me. Like, I don't feel anything. That's because your whole system around dopamine's fucked. It's the same for like when you're reading something and you watch you're like on one page, you're like, oh, I can't go past this page. It's too boring. Like, I can't do it. It's like my identity that I cannot go further than one page. No, it's not. It's literally just like your dopamine neurochemistry is just completely cooked because of the modern world, that you just have to do like this huge renovation to your nervous system to essentially get you back to baseline. And unfortunately, that comes at a cost of feeling some incredible discomfort. It requires some willpower. And to be honest with you, I think like a majority of people who say they want to change probably don't, because they don't realize how much effort it actually takes. So again, it's probably like in the right direction that they're acknowledging that what they're doing is wrong, but you still have to take the action. And it's not easy. It's really not easy. And I'm sure Andeea, sorry, is that how you say it? Andeea?
Andeea.
Andeea, sorry. That's probably like Australian way of saying it. Andeea, like with that, I'm sure you can probably back me up on that, like in terms of the cravings and stuff, that it's not an easy battle. And it's something that just takes a lot of time and patience. And there may be slip ups along the way, and that's okay as well. But yeah, ultimately, it's just like you have to put in the work, basically. And you have to be ready to change. And that's exactly what happened to me during COVID. During that time, I was like, okay, shit. I think it was when I broke my wrist because I jumped a fence running away from the police, because it was like a COVID party thing that like we only allowed 5 people in the house, and I was doing drugs and alcohol and everything else. And that's what made me realize, fuck, I've got to change. Anyway, yeah, I'm sure you can back me up on all that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And you just said something too, that with the reading something and then like I can't get past the page. This is boring, blah, blah, blah. I think that a lot of people are saying, oh, I have ADHD, or you have dopamine deficiency. You could be misdiagnosing yourself. We should never be diagnosing ourselves, but I think that could be misconstrued as that.
Yeah, 100%. Like I call it like pseudo ADHD. I think obviously there's different traits for men and women, but like I've mostly done a lot of research around men and ADHD. I say women is more like it's more like what people call OCD. When someone is like really organized or something and obsessed with it, like people like call that OCD, but that's more of a trait of ADHD in women for the most part. And of course, there's probably like similarities in certain ways. And you just got to think, I'm just speaking about men here because I know it the most, but as men, like we're naturally meant to have some sort of ADHD, because I can't remember who wrote this post. I think it might have been Noah Ryan on X. And he said that men, traditionally hunter and gatherers, we're meant to be hyper vigilant, hyper focused. We're meant to have like this awareness, like hyper awareness for like short periods, but then like flash over to something else. And obviously like when you find like your animal you want to kill or whatever, and you want to hunt it down and eat it, Like obviously that's going to where you drive that like hyper awareness, hyper focus in like huge amounts. And I suppose that's kind of like reflecting me to what I do with like when I'm learning or if I'm participating in anything that's going to tie into dopamine. So yeah, I think like that's the whole mechanism, is like understanding that like naturally we're meant to have these traits, but they just get exacerbated in the modern world. And I think the whole thing around like this pseudo ADHD is it's just the whole imbalance of dopamine dysfunction in the body, and like or like imbalance basically. So like from the standpoint of like actually synthesizing it is off, because we need that endogenous or exogenous UV light from the sun or from biophotons, as an example, breaking it down from melanin. So again, that kind of ties in with the UV light, that like we need that reservoir of melanin to potentially cleave off and make dopamine down the line. And then I think beyond that is like how the receptors are expressed. So there's even research with like vitamin D from sunlight upregulates dopamine receptors, especially the ones that kind of two kinds. So D1 and D2. So D1 is like that one that's tied to like phasic pulses of dopamine. So like the unexpected ones that you feel like this pulse of like pleasure and motivation and reward when something happens out of the blue. And again, this is like a biohack, to be honest with you, like with learning a language, because you would just speak to someone and all of a sudden you just like nail a conversation and you just feel really good. And the same applies for when like you're partying at night. And for example, you take cocaine or whatever it is, whatever your drug of choice is, right? And you come out and you may have a really good conversation with someone, or it seems like it's good because of the drugs. And like you have that phasic pulse of dopamine because it's like unexpected. So that whole system's off, but like vitamin D plays a role in terms of regulating those receptors. And then vitamin D also increases something called GDNF, which is called glial derived neurotrophic factor. And what that does, it acts in the central nervous system to optimize the survival and strength of the synapses in dopaminergic neurons. So again, like this whole light thing and like copying nature is obviously like a very big deal here. But then beyond that, there's other things and other nuances as well. What's going on in the gut? That can obviously have a huge influence with like neuroinflammation as an example. Stress and trauma, as you mentioned before, I think that's obviously really important on top. And it ties into the same story to a degree, like around like inflammation and redox. And then like even just like the metabolism of dopamine as well. So like methylation is required to actually remove dopamine and clear it. And if there's defects around methylation, or if someone's like an undermethylator, they'll naturally make less dopamine. So yeah, there's just all these other considerations. And I think we have to think of the body like as an engineer and like essentially think of every little system and how it can be supported to ensure that it can be enhanced to the best of its abilities.
Yeah.
Well said. I like that engineering.
Wow, Jack, just with like my schooling and everything with addiction, you just made me like, for some reason, I was very separated in my head. We learned that addiction's biopsychosocial disease. And you just helped me link light to all three of those pieces. And so I just want to thank you for that.
My absolute pleasure. It's pretty cool when you can put the dots, hey. Yeah, I think the whole light piece is a pretty big deal. But yeah, it's just like the light, like endogenously that we make is more important than the light that we get from
Oh, wow.
the sun right now. I think it's because that essentially dictates not just like external light, which obviously plays a role in terms of regulating that pattern. Like for example, like infrared light from the sun is going to optimize what's going on the electron transport chain with mitochondria. It's going to enhance collagen synthesis. It's going to do all these things to essentially modulate the DC electric current throughout the system through its semiconductor fabrication, basically. But then also it modulates the biophotons because it optimizes how we utilize oxygen. And the better that we can utilize oxygen, because again, if we don't use it properly, it becomes a toxin. But if we use it properly, it's something that is fundamental to life and to essentially allowing us to thrive. So yeah, I think everything that we're talking about, like around like the light show inside of us, it is connected to absolutely everything. And I think like, obviously you've got the gut as well, and looking at what's going on with the emissions of what's going on with the composition of the gut microbiome. Bifidobacterium may emit a certain light frequency that might be different to Lactobacillus or Akkermansia, whatever it is. But yeah, I think ultimately it still comes down to, as complex as it is, good to know, isn't it? Because all of this stuff that we're talking about, any sort of stress or anything that affects the body is going to put an imprint on your mitochondria and your cells in terms of how well they use oxygen, which ties to how well that we can tunnel electrons and recycle protons within the mitochondrial matrix and the intermembrane space. But then it also reflects this free radical pattern and the biophotons that come or leapfrog or from that, basically, that drive life as we know it. Because again, it drives back to what we said about Roland Van Wyck, that all diseases have a certain biophoton pattern. And if we're able to test these biophoton emissions, then we'll be able to detect disease before like symptoms and blood work. So tracing it all back to that, like it's essentially any sort of stress will influence all that. So it is like really cool to understand it, because that's literally, in my opinion, like that's the root of what makes or breaks us as a human being.
Did you read his book, Light Shapes Life? Was that an influence
Yes.
in some of this understanding?
Yes, so that was probably like 3 years ago. I don't really read any more books now, to tell you the truth. Like I prefer to just like read the research. I don't know, it seems to stimulate me more. So yeah, but I did read his book and Becca's. I read both of Becca's books.
Yeah.
That was a while. That was probably few of the first ones I read. Cross Currents and
Body Electric.
I've read all those books. It's probably been a while back, but yeah, I would say like the Roland Van Wyck's book and Becca's book are probably the best ones, alongside Jim Al-Khalili's book,
Oh,
Life on the Edge. That's a
yes,
great book.
Is it? I've got it. I haven't read it yet. Okay, I've got it. I really want to read Roland. I know it's a pricey book, but I think it's well worth the price, the
Definitely.
value. Yeah. We just to put a plug in, we interviewed Dr. Jack Cruz, and the first question was about Robert O'Becker's book, and an hour and a half later, we came out the other side, and it was pretty fascinating. So if you haven't heard that interview, and anybody listening who hasn't heard it, it's quite something. And what we learned.
That's awesome.
Book.
Yeah, I think he does his best work on podcasts, to be honest with you.
Oh, he does. You just never know where it's going to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Something else that just, I don't know if this is what you're working on now, but I just had a sense that you are an expert and that I would, if I had a client that had this issue, I would be sending them to you, is both. Initially, I would have said just men's hormones, but now it's women's. I've actually pointed somebody in your direction for PCOS.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So how you're getting success with clients in raising their testosterone. And I know for myself, I'll be honest, at some point I was measured. I finally hit menopause. I just got pronounced in menopause, but I'm really late. Like I'm 50, almost 59 next month. But
That's great.
I was told
That's really good. Honestly, I think like the average menopause age 100 years ago was something like 56. That's amazing.
I figure it's good to keep that flow going, and it's like a little detox every month. And I encourage women not to curse it. I think it's a wonderful thing, and it's just something to celebrate when you hit it as well. But I was told somewhere maybe 10 years ago that I had undetectable limits of testosterone. So that probably wasn't a great thing. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've learned about how to raise men's testosterone, and maybe some top needle movers, and maybe how to maybe raise women's, and of course PCOS, we might want to lower it, right?
Yeah. So it's a pretty open-ended question, to tell you the truth, because if I had someone come to me, and I do a pretty in-depth assessment now, and I'm slowly adding things to it, but like I'm just going to explain the process just to provide the nuance to it. But basically, like someone will come to me, I'll have a deep look at their symptoms, like probably 100 symptoms worth. I'll have a ticker, like a checklist thing. So go through that. I have a questionnaire and all that. And then like blood work, I think is equally as important, but you can't have the symptoms. You can't have the blood work, like valid data, without the symptoms. So I think it just adds a bit of context around it all. So any sort of blood work, or even just like GI maps, occasionally like organic acid tests, mold tests, whatever it is, like I'm happy to add that as data. And then the next thing is like health history. So looking at from the perspective of like, what's their health like historically, obviously? Was there trauma, like a nervous system dysregulation at all? Did they take antibiotics? Whatever it is, like vaccinations, anything like that. You really have to understand like all of that, right? And then on top of that is like family tree. So like siblings, how close are you between your siblings? Obviously, I think if you're a middle sibling and like your oldest is like a year and a half difference or something, I think that's pretty significant compared to if you're the oldest, as an example. That's something I'm paying attention to. Looking at the health of the parents, grandparents, and I think especially in this case, like the mum and the mum's mum. So that's obviously going to be like maternally passed mitochondrial DNA. So that's where we tie into the whole biophysics stuff again. And on top of that, then there's the environment. So environment in terms of like where they live right now, where have they lived, but then also like internal environment. So again, this kind of ties in with the whole trauma, nervous system stuff, what's going on from like a stress standpoint. And then it's essentially just like mapping like symptoms. So for example, if there's like eczema, say let's just say in the sacral region, like near the belly button, maybe a little bit lower down. So it'd be classified as probably like I would say that's like either T12 on the spinal segment or S1, more or less, or in the sacral area. So then you track that. Like I'm very specific. I'm like, okay, so where is the exact location of, for example, eczema? And we'll link it back to the spinal segments, the chakras, because again, like that, I think that plays a very big role, like around like the chakras, like it could be tied to a sacral chakra blockage. So this is where you tie in like the emotional and spiritual side of things. But then also from like a neuroanatomical side of things, like the sacral regions are tied to the sciatic nerve, which feeds like the whole of your lower body, your lower limbs, which is very important. But then it also ties in with the colon. So like we got like the hypergastric plexus, which is like a bunch of sympathetic nerves, as well as parasympathetic nerves that feed the distal 1/3 of the colon, which is where majority of your gut microbiome is found. There's also like the pelvic plexus, which feeds into like your sexual organs. I'm just like very big in terms of assessing all of that basically, and like tying in like the biomechanics side of things as well. What's your posture look like? Because again, that can tie in with, for example, hunched over shoulders could mean like a closed heart chakra, or if the tailbone's not tucked properly, that could be tied to the root chakra. So I'm doing that whole assessment, and then that's when I can actually make an assessment of what could truly boost your hormones or optimize your hormones in that case, because it's just so different for each person. Obviously, like you got the basic stuff where the fundamental stuff, so like light, nutrition, hydration, sleep, stress, exercise, movement, like all of these things are obviously like huge, and that's like the 80-20. But I think obviously it just depends on like the severity of the case. If someone's got really complex conditions, there's probably like 10 things happening at once. And as an example, if someone has like a negative gram bacterial infection in their colon or potentially SIBO, that the endotoxin that gets liberated from that is lipopolysaccharide, and that can act directly in the testes to literally tank your Leydig cells. So that could be very different in terms of what I would recommend versus someone who has like maybe some nervous system imbalances, and maybe they just need a bit of support around the vagus nerve to essentially put them back into a parasympathetic state so they can heal for the most part. And again, like they can obviously feed into each other, all of these conditions and symptoms and stuff, but it's ultimately just like making the assessment there. And that's where I can like truly recommend what someone actually needs. So yeah, I'm sorry I can't give you like a proper question around that. I'm happy to like elaborate, but that's the process that I go through before I can even give any recommendations to someone.
How do you keep your health while you're on a screen so much? Are you doing it outside?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm outside pretty much all the time. My environment at home's like at night is very dark, just like red lights for the most part, or unless like we're cooking, we have no blue light bulbs essentially, but usually have dinner before the sun sets, to be honest with you. For example, right now I've got no top on. I've got like strong UV light right now. It's probably UVB is probably already kicked in at 7 a.m., 8 a.m. right now. I've got my feet on the earth, so I'm grounded. I try and again, I did a workout before I jumped on this call. And then yeah, I mean I have a daylight as well, and I try and do a lot of stuff analog now. So I have the daylight tablet, which kind of definitely helps, I think, from a screen perspective of funneling as much work as I can into that. And it's all offline for the most part. And then I think from a focus standpoint, you're just doing a lot more because you're just like super focused. You're not like accidentally opening a tab and you see a notification pop up, you get sidetracked or whatever it is. So I do that. And then I also have like pen and paper, and like I try and print out books as well whenever I can to essentially read directly from that. Other things that I've been doing as well is that from a screen time perspective and trying to minimize it, is that I'll start to take my calls where I'm trying to not do video calls much now, to tell you the truth. I just think if I can not do it, it's better for me personally. Also, just if I can take the call whilst I'm going for a walk, or just like walking around, getting some steps in as well, I think that's obviously beneficial. And responding to clients with voice to text as well. Oh, sorry, just like voice memos. But then I also use voice to text for a lot of my things now. I think this is where like AI can be really leveraged for people that are on screens all the time, that you can just do like voice to text with certain apps where you just literally talk to it, tell it what you want it to do. Maybe use like an AI prompt as an example, like using GPT to do something, just to make your life that little bit easier, where you're not using screens and you're minimizing that for the most part, but then you're also maximizing your time as well by leveraging AI for its benefits and not for it not being super reliant on it, but using it as a tool. That's some of the tricks that I've been using lately anyway. And then of course on top of that, like I just try and do all the things that I just mentioned before, all the fundamental stuff. I'm due to get some blood work soon, so whenever I get that, I'll definitely assess it, and if I need to supplement something I will, or include a functional food, or just support something a bit more. But yeah, it's no different to anyone else really. I suppose I just have the blessing of being in nature pretty much all the time, just due to the fact that this is where I chose to live, and getting strong sun and low EMFs on top. So yeah, that's basically what I do.
So we both live a little more north, and Andeea's, yeah, she's originally from Minnesota, and I used to live close to there, and I know how cold it is. It's really frigid there. So that maybe brings us, if we can talk a little bit about cold exposure. Are you a fan terms of how produces the biophotons in the body? Just how much we talked about that earlier. I'm just curious. Are you a fan
Yeah.
of exposure?
Yeah, I think it's good. It depends on the person. If we go back to that example I made, if someone has like nervous system dysregulation, neuroinflammation, maybe it's not a good thing initially to do, or it's something that like really has to be eased in slowly. So starting with like face dunks, cold showers, and then actually doing cold water immersion. Maybe it's literally just like wearing a t-shirt outside when it's cold and seeing how you feel first before like going from 0 to 100. But yeah, do I like cold exposure? Absolutely. I think it serves a huge benefit. I think the main thing is its effect on PGC1 alpha, which stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis. And we've got to think that if we're stimulating more mitochondria, that means we can make more metabolic water, we can utilize oxygen more efficiently, we make more light. So again, this is what ties in with what you were saying with like endogenous biophotons. Yeah, I think it's amazing for that. Even from just like a weight loss perspective, enhancing leptin sensitivity has
Yeah.
huge benefits there. And then I suppose the fact as well is like the cooling on your surfaces enhances semiconduction within itself as well. So that's where obviously in winter, where there's less light to be harvested from the sun, where like, for example, where I am or somewhere in summer, you make up for that by getting that cold stimulation on top of consuming, like literally consuming semiconductors like DHA from like cold water fish, that you're enhancing the efficiency of the system, replacing the semiconductors that you can't make from like places that have stronger UV light. So yeah, I think it's honestly, it's almost like a non-negotiable, like doing some sort of cold exposure in the winter. Otherwise, yeah, it's going to be really difficult. And I think that's partially why a lot of people get seasonal depression is because that cold replaces light in those stronger light months.
Oh, thank you so much for that. Because
You're welcome.
I do actually, I took the Wim Hof course about 5 or 6 years ago, and I'm like hypo, originally Graves, and which is hyperthyroidism, took some radioactive iodine many years ago, wouldn't do the same.
That,
Now,
sorry, just sorry to interrupt you there, but that's exactly what my girlfriend has. And I don't know many people with Graves' disease. So just wanted to add that there.
oh, we'll have to connect because yeah, so now I have to take medication. I take desiccated thyroid, but I actually took the Wim Hof course with a hot water bottle in my backpack because at the end of it they have this voluntary tube if you're gonna get in this cold tub. And I didn't think I could do it because at that point I could not warm my body, but I
Yeah.
did it and I was able to warm up, and then that just started like I eased into it. I was doing cold showers to ease into it, but it has changed my love for winter. And now I cross country ski like in a Kinnicky sometimes, like when it's -10 and above, and always with a backpack and things that are safe. But exactly what you said, it's just like a high for me. I love it. I love doing cold exposure in the winter, and I'm like so happy all winter. I look forward to winter for that reason. And I'm so happy you said that because I don't know, about 6 months ago, this exercise physiologist, Stacy something, she came out and said that women are better doing heat. And I understand what she's trying to say, but I think it turned off a lot of women from wanting to do cold therapy. And we've seen that in our local area. Like the women aren't doing it quite as much. I go to a cold river once a week with a group, and I think she turned off a lot of women. And I'm sad because I think, oh, it's such an amazing tool. So thank you for so eloquently explaining that.
No worries. I think, yeah, you're on the money. And I do think there is probably like slight gender differences in terms of how much one should be doing. And I think it's like traces back to like men being more hunter and gatherers, probably getting that little bit more, like especially if it's in the higher latitude, like through a snowstorm and like being fundamental to eat. Like I think there is like a bit of a balance there in terms of maybe men could do a bit more than women in this case. And I think also the nuance is like taking into consideration like your menstrual cycle and what time is best suited to actually run it as well. I think I would argue that like probably around, I could be wrong here, I'm just assuming here just based off the hormones. I would say like towards the end of the luteal phase or post menstruation, I would say it would be the main parts. But yeah, I think you got to think as well ancestrally that if I think the Nordics are a prime example here that they use like heat and cold therapy. And I think that's the best combination, to tell you the truth. Like leveraging like heat, again, like we have fire, we've been able to make that even in like cooler months, we can leverage using that. And then I think like the other thing is like also volcanic areas as well. Again, this is probably a bit more specific, but like places like Iceland, I would imagine ancestrally that because it gets so cold there and it's just so extreme, I'm sure they would have leveraged like the volcanic activity to keep them warm as well. So I think it is like a definitely like a balance of the two. And I suppose like ancestrally, they probably didn't need to do cold exposure because that was just their life. So it's just like getting that little taste to do it. But yeah, I think there's some truth into what she's saying, but like to completely neglect it, to me, based off what we just spoke about, cold exposure and the stimulation replaces the sun, then yeah, to me it just sounds like not a good idea.
You've written too something I captured about 48 reasons to do cold therapy many years ago, but something you mentioned, it affects bile acids. Can it help your digestion? Is that true? Or did you write that, or did I see that somewhere? Does that ring a
Yeah,
bell?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. And then something about CD36, a taste receptor for fatty acids. So it almost helps you crave the food that's in your environment.
Correct. Yeah.
Almost
So I'm just moving to the shade here, so my laptop doesn't overcook. This is one of the benefits of living in the tropics, is that your laptop is constantly overheating.
Right.
Okay. So yeah, so with cold exposure, you're correct in saying that. There's a paper called "What's Bile Got to Do with It?" And it
Okay.
showed that bile acids increase. Oh, sorry, cold exposure increases bile acid production. And you got to think like from the standpoint of fat absorption, and thinking that at a higher latitude in the winter, like by design, we should be having slightly less carbohydrates and probably more fats. Again, I'm probably a bit more flexible with that most like these days, but I do think there is still like a slight variation in macronutrient consumption. And you got to think that if we have the cold exposure there to stimulate the bile acids, and bile acids
Mhm.
form bile salts, and bile salts are tied to liquefaction of fats, so literally like the absorption of fats in the small intestine, then it just makes sense. And I think you find these things like that nature works in a feedback loop in a very beautiful way. And you just get all these little clues that like, okay, it just makes sense then in that case that like cold exposure is probably not a bad idea. And then on top of that, like bile acids within themselves also like they act on certain receptors, like protein coupled receptors, to essentially increase thyroid activation. So the conversion of T4 to T3. And you got to think in the cold where we want to probably be a little bit hypothyroid under certain circumstances to induce thermogenesis, it just makes sense around that as well, doesn't it? Yeah. And I think like beyond that, like the bile acids as well, like antimicrobial. So again, like forming secondary bile acids in the gut, that essentially means like you're going to regulate your gut microbiome indirectly through cold exposure. And we got to think as well, like the sunlight does that too. So again, it's like this balancing act, or no, sorry, yin and yang, I'd say that like where the sun will do certain things, but then also if you do the right things in the winter months, then it's also going to have a similar effect. And it's just all about, I think a lot of people are living in this like endless summer, especially with artificial light. Even like the temperature is playing a big role in terms of circadian regulation, where they're sitting in a comforting 18 to 22 degrees Celsius all the time. And then just artificial light at night until 9 p.m., 10 p.m. So they're creating this summer without the benefits of infrared and UV. And very much the same in the winter, where it's still like this 24/7 summer. And then you got to think it's not like a sustainable place to be in, or environment to be in, should I say, because like we're meant to be working in this feedback loop with the planet and how it spins around the earth and how seasons occur and how we have different foods at different times and all of these things. So when you essentially create a bottleneck around all that, I think that's where you can start to see issues. And yeah, I suppose the other interesting thing, like if we're tying in like seasons as well, is that melatonin can be induced by cold exposure, but also through infrared and like a shitload of darkness at night. I can already see, Laura, you've got your red lights on. Same for you up there. And then what that essentially does is like melatonin also has some effects on the vitamin D receptor. And then you got to think, well, that's the same for bile acid. So there's a certain bile acid, I can't remember the name of it, but it acts on the vitamin D receptor as well. So you just got to think there is like these feedback loops that we can capitalize on, provided that we copy nature.
Yeah, so we spoke about addiction earlier. I would love to tie cold exposure into that. What would be the benefits for someone, especially who's in early recovery? We were talking about how you suffered cravings for at least a year. There are so many people that are on and off, they're returning to use, they're going back, or they can't decide. Would cold exposure help them?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say the best thing to be doing, like obviously beyond the fundamental stuff, is yeah, I would say like cold exposure, again, coupled with that sauna therapy, or yeah, probably sauna in this case, like heat therapy. I think it's just like such a powerful combination because like I think the heat some additional benefits compared to the cold. So I think having I think anything like that to somewhat replace it. And again, you're going to feel like a bit of a drive there from like the exercise, like in the cold, like you're still going to feel like that high. And I think that, to be honest with you, I think that's what people need at that stage. It's not like it's something that you become obsessive over, but I think you still need that stimulation. Otherwise, you're more prone to probably relapsing. So, yeah, I think anything like cold, sunlight, like all of these things can be used as tools for someone who's battling with addiction. But I would say, like, on top of that, as I said before, like the nuance with like cases, like someone could have like really chronic gut issues and that could be tied to their addiction as well because of the effect that like the gut brain axes and can induce neuroinflammation and that can create like GABA glutamate imbalances and mitochondrial dysfunction. And what we see there is that we can see addictive like tendencies. Like a
Right.
prime example is Candida. It releases ethanol, which is like alcohol, right? But then that ethanol reacts with dopamine and that makes something called salsolinol. And that salsolinol literally like attacks dopamine neurons and induces cell death. So you got to think, yeah. So you got to think, right? If someone, it's just very different for each person. Obviously, like you got the fundamental stuff, but then there's more specific. So someone that comes back with blood work and they have like high liver enzymes, maybe high blood glucose, higher end insulin, high or low GGT or something. And then like we look at the symptoms around like yeast and candida, maybe there's some sugar cravings, maybe there's some like dermatitis, so dandruff, some bloating, reacting to like carbs and starches and stuff. Then yeah, like it's going to be very specific in terms of what they might need because if we just give them like the cold exposure, it's not going to work basically because we have to go the extra mile in terms of what they specifically. But yeah, like
thanks for clarifying that.
yeah, I think it's a great tool though. Nevertheless, like it can be a really useful tool.
And then do you have any case studies for people that you've helped that were either in early recovery or maybe they were still actively using and they came to you for help?
Yeah, probably one of my earlier clients. I don't really get them as much anymore. I seem to get more people with like chronic gut issues,
Yeah.
autoimmune sort of vibe, metabolic issues. But yeah, there was one probably like a year ago now, maybe a little bit longer actually. And yeah, he went pretty much sober. And I think like when we first started, he just decided to go sober. And he was still, that was mostly from alcohol predominantly. But in Australia, I don't know, it's probably the same in America. Like alcohol can feed into other things as well. So
Yeah.
he stopped the alcohol and then he stopped everything else, but he was still like vaping as well and smoking. And I think maybe weed. I can't even remember if he was smoking weed at the same time, but we got him off all of that over the span of 3 months actually. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, and he went off his medication for OCD as well. He was on SSRIs. I think it was fluvoxetine. So we got him tapered off that as well.
Wow.
Slowly.
Congratulations. Wow.
Yeah, so that was cool. And that was very much like a case where he didn't have huge issues in the gut or anything like that. So yeah, it was probably more attacking it from the standpoint of stress management, optimizing mindset, and then like just a few little hacks on top that kind of support addiction. So I don't know if you've heard of histone HDAC inhibitors. So like things like butyrate, niacin, carnitine can be really used. Of course, like butyrate links back to the gut because it's a short chain fatty acid. But using these little tools on top can be really useful because they help essentially relieve addiction in certain ways, just for its way how it affects what's going on with epigenetics. So provided that you're doing the right things, like from a health standpoint, you add these things as tools on top, they can be really beneficial. Same with L-tyrosine as an example. I'm not opposed to like using like the main substrate for dopamine production temporarily as like a tool to have someone have a little bit of like higher tonic dopamine activity that will essentially prevent them from having as much cravings and stuff.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Do we have
There's
time
lots
for
of tricks.
do we have time for one more question, Andeea? Or I know we're probably
It's
getting
up to Jack.
it's up to
Yeah,
Jack.
go for it.
Yeah.
You can ask 5 more questions.
Oh my God, there's so many I would want to ask. Oh boy, because I'll tell you where I first heard you. You were with Kira Lee, and you were on who's Australian, who's been on. We interviewed Kira Lee. The two of you were on this podcast interview, and I'd never heard you. I just heard your name was Jack, and I think in my mind I was picturing Cameron Bork. You just had so much knowledge about melanin, and just it was coming out your mouth. And I'm like, who is this guy? I have to go find him. And it was so funny when I found you, and you're like, he's got a few tattoos and got some earrings. I was like, this is not I was thinking of this guy with a bow tie and nerdy glasses. So I was so excited to see that your shirt's off, you're in the sun. But yeah, there's a supplemental question I have, but just melanin. How did you learn so much about melanin? And can you just give us we haven't really touched on melanin that much in this podcast. So you're the first just to talk about it as wide band gapped semiconductor, I believe it is.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about why we want to optimize our melanin, and why like spray tans and melanotan are not the equivalent?
Yeah. So with melanin, how I learned from it, like everyone knows what melanin is, right? Like I even did melanotan when I was like 21 or something like that. I
Me
remember
too.
injecting it and made myself tan, and I would use like a solarium. So I was doing all this crazy shit. And yeah, I think so. Jack Cruz has definitely spoken about it a lot. I have to
Mhm.
give him credit around it because I think a lot of his research, or just like him connecting the dots, has made me understand a lot about it. And then there's a few others as well. Jay does a pretty good job of explaining melanin, if you know him.
Yes,
I can't remember his last name.
Dahaj, something like that.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. He's awesome. And
Okay.
then there's other people like Arturo Solis Herrera, which again, I think his research is a bit
Yes.
murky to tell you the truth. But yeah, there's a few people that have done some pretty cool research on it. And yeah, I think the thing with melanin is that what's interesting, I could go so many ways with this, but I think the first thing which is interesting is that as primates, like we evolved to have no skin, have no hair, sorry. So like our melanin has migrated internally and we constantly need to renovate it because we are we're the most, besides probably like dolphins alongside us, like we're one of the most advanced species in terms of what we're capable of. Dolphins are another story. I don't know if you've read into like how dolphins sleep, but it's pretty incredible to tell you the truth. But yeah, search it. You'll be amazed. But yeah, the thing with melanin is that we have adopted because then it's like melanin's found not only in our skin, but it's found in like our heart, sexual organs, in our brain, neuromelanin, in the gut lining. So it's found in many regions. And again, it's like the research is still a little bit murky around it because it's not like a very niche topic. Everyone just thinks, oh, melanin, skin cancer. That's what the centralized basis is. But yeah, there is proof around like it doing some pretty incredible things. And this is what links back to like me working on power lines to a degree because it helps me understand the body from like an electrical standpoint. And the thing with melanin is that it it is a wide bandgap semiconductor and it can absorb a ton of light. It can absorb a ton of EMFs, to tell you the truth, and convert that into usable energy. So that's one of the most amazing benefits from it. And then it does a bunch of other amazing things. So if we talk about from the light standpoint, like the more melanin we have, the more that we can absorb certain light frequencies and like fine tune that system. But then at the same time, it also controls light free radicals as well. And free radicals are paramagnetic. So essentially what it does is it can reduce them in terms of reducing oxidative stress, but it also controls like the magnetic effect that they may have down the line as well, which is pretty cool. So that's more tied to the timing within cells, more so as like the biophotons are tied to the signaling. So we have that going on. And then like it does a bunch of other cool shit. So like I just read research maybe a month ago that like melanin, when it's hydrated by mitochondrial water, so again, this ties in with the whole oxygen utilization story. Deuterium depleted water, if it is hydrates melanin, the sheet of melanin, what essentially happens is that melanin becomes this huge capacitor of charge. And people talk about water, like the dielectric constant of water, which dielectric constant means like how much electromagnetic energy we can fundamentally store, which is obviously of great benefit because it ties into the whole idea that we are this battery that can store energy and release it as needed. So that the dielectric constant of deuterium depleted water is 160, but melanin is 1000 when it's hydrated. So like to think that if we have melanin, and again, we can build it up not just from sunlight, but also from cold exposure because of what goes on with the effect with like endogenous UV biophotons and its effect on POMC. And you see that obviously like with Eskimos and stuff, like they're like more tan than some Mexicans and they live at the 60th latitude. So it's pretty wild in terms of that. Like melanin within that is it's sheeted around certain regions like in our cells and it essentially it is controlling the signal around biophotons and free radicals to literally control life as we know it, provided it's hydrated. But then again, stores charge. It can also reduce oxidative stress. It also binds like heavy metals and also like cations. So I read like this really interesting paper. It would have been a year ago now. I don't even know where I found it to be honest, but like melanin's ability to literally because I'm sure you've dug into it before, but like calcium, sodium, potassium, chloride, all of these metals regulate enzymes and action potentials in the nervous system, whatever it is, basically, that these ions are involved. And what melanin does, it can bind and release these ions to control the signal as well. Yeah, really cool research around that. I suppose if you tie in like melanin and what else is made from tyrosine, like, so tyrosine forms L-DOPA, L-DOPA forms melanin. It can form dopamine, noradrenaline, adrenaline, and then also thyroid hormone feeds into it as well from tyrosine. So you got to think there's this the whole interplay with all of these like light-based molecules that kind of feed into one another. So dopamine can form melanin, melanin can form dopamine. Some people say that melanin can even form thyroid hormone. Again, there's a bit of murkiness around that. But yeah, this is just all this interesting stuff that melanin can really do. And then I found, I could go on forever, but there's also research that we have higher neuromelanin in our frontal lobes compared to other species as well. So then I think it's just like melanin plays a big role in terms of our consciousness on top of that, and like our overall being as a human or as a life form, I would say. So yeah, I could probably keep going around this,
Oh,
but
wow.
I'll stop. But yeah, it's pretty
Oh,
incredible. And I just think, again, any sort of stress will degrade melanin. And then you just got to think that's by design to essentially downgrade us, to yoke us to how well our mitochondria are running. So that's why, on top of that, like, you got to think like a lot of people are under more stress than what we would have been centuries ago. So we need to keep rebuilding that melanin. So that's why we need to be outside, be in the cold. But it's not just for melanin, but it's also just to rebuild every semiconductor. It's like we have to be in a factory every single day to rebuild our bioelectrical structure to allow energy and information to flow efficiently. And that factory is just nature.
Oh, whoa.
I'm typing away here. This is how I
This has
learned that.
been so great just from a decentralized standpoint. We really we need to learn about all these things so we can take matters into our own hands. And you have really laid a lot of groundwork today for people to have a good understanding, or at least a trampoline to go off on a certain topic that they feel like they need to learn about, depending on where they're at in their health or what issues they might be having. This has just been really wonderful.
Awesome. Yeah, I had a great time. You asked some really good questions. I wasn't sure how deep we were going to go, but I think we went pretty deep.
You
Yeah.
did. I love it.
We are coming to time here. We thank you so much for being so generous with your time. Why don't you let us know where people can find you, and then a little bit, some details about your Skool platform?
Okay, cool. So yeah, you can find me on Instagram and X. So X is Jack_Schroder_, and then Instagram is Jack_Schroder_. JackSchroder.com is my website, and you'll be able to go there, and you can potentially apply to work with me. I only take on like a limited amount of clients, but yeah, there's an initial consult there. You can book in, and then essentially, if we decide that we're a good fit for each other, we can continue our relationship, whether it's health coaching or like mentoring. So again, like with mentoring, it'd be more so like I can help you with your clients, help you with blood work, help you understand symptomology, supplements, like all the tricks that I've learned, passed down from mentors that I've had, essentially, and just my own practice. So there's that. And then with the initial consult, if we decide to go further, the initial consult gets deducted, basically. So we have that. And then I would say the best thing I have is my Skool community. So it's called Health Optimization, and you can find that on the website, or skool.com/health optimization. And if you enjoyed anything that we were speaking about here, then you're in for an absolute treat in the community, because this is just like the surface level compared to what's in there. There's 85 different protocols, 60 webinars. I'm doing like webinars pretty much weekly. There's weekly calls, like coaching calls or Q&As, essentially, where you can just jump on, ask me questions, whether it's health or learning related. And then on top of all this content, you have the option to start a health journal or a learning journal. So that's where I check it pretty much. It's the first thing I do when I wake up. Besides doing a bit of breath work and a prayer, that's the first thing I'll do, is like I jump on Skool and reply to everyone and catch up to everyone who's asked questions or made any comments. But with the health journal there, I think the amazing thing about it is that you could literally just post your blood work. I've got like a whole guide around how to do it, but you post your blood work, symptoms, what's been going on. Again, everything that I said from like a assessment standpoint, like just posting the short few paragraphs around that and blood work. And then I'll just point you in the right direction around like certain interventions to explore, what protocols and webinars might be beneficial of you to learn. And essentially, it's not like obviously as in depth as my one-to-one stuff, but I'm getting some pretty decent results just from guiding people around that. If you give it like 3 months being in there, I can almost guarantee that you're going to have some sort of relief around symptoms, and that's going to cost a fraction of my one-to-ones or anyone's one-to-one stuff. And at the same time, learning to be your own practitioner, and you can find the patterns in your blood work and learn how the body works basically. And that's what I'm trying to do, is just empower people to essentially understand that they have the power to heal themselves. And I think the nuance with what we have nowadays online is there's so much information and so much bullshit, but then also probably not the right word here. It's just like stuff that doesn't apply to them, because no one who's posting online knows their context. So I'm like trying to be that middleman where I just literally dissect what you fundamentally need and then just disregard everything else, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's the community. I have a Substack as well that I just post like some of the protocols in, but it's definitely not as in depth, nowhere near. But again, it's if for someone who wants to just like a little bit of a taste and just wants to earn my trust, then you can also dabble into that and then go over to the Skool.
Your Skool platform, do you have a minimum you need to do it for 3 months to sign up, or 6 months? Or because it seems like you would be offering a lot of information, if somebody just signed in for a month.
Exactly. And that's why I raised prices recently, and I'll probably continue to do it as like more members join. But like you literally can pay $79 and you have access to way more information than probably most courses have, to be honest with you. It's probably just like a little bit less organized per se. But again, I'm obviously there to like guide you in terms of what you need to do or what you need to learn. So yeah, you can definitely just join for a month if you wanted to. But I will say, I think a lot of people tend to stay in there because of the weekly calls, the weekly webinars. So that within itself is probably worth the value with my 24-hour response time. And then just everything additional on top is just a bonus. But yeah, I'd like to give, especially people who go around like want to post a health journal and stuff, I say 3 months is a reasonable amount of time to get some results. I think if you're in there for a month and you don't notice much traction, I just don't think it happens that fast for some people. Sometimes you find relief and you get like little wins, but I think 3 months, just like being in there, doing the best you can, absorbing the information, being guided by me, I honestly think it's inevitable that you get some sort of relief in your symptoms.
Yeah. Awesome.
Fabulous.
Yeah,
And
I didn't realize you had mentorship. That's great.
Yeah. And honestly, it's something that I've started to include more so than the health coaching now. I'm definitely shifting towards more of an education standpoint. It's probably about 50-50. And I honestly really enjoy working with mentors because it's all the stuff that we spoke about today, like really in depth. And especially when you get someone who asks like really good questions, I'm just like, doesn't even feel like work to me at all. It just feels like just like, yeah, just elaborating on stuff that I love to talk about. So yeah, it's a bit of a mixture at the moment, but yeah, I think it is a really great outlet. And I would say that like, for me, like I'll always have a mentor now just because I understand the value of it. I value it more than courses by a mile just because it's very specific and like you literally enter through a time portal, like in terms of just everything just speeds up in terms of learning and you just get guided directly, which I think is just incredibly valuable. Yeah.
Awesome. I just realized we didn't ask you our signature question, which we usually ask before that, but I'm going to ask it now. And we always ask everybody, what does quantum healthy mean to you? I think you've really done a great detailed answer throughout, but how would you sum it up?
Quantum healthy?
Yeah.
I suppose health. So obviously health from the quantum standpoint, which encompasses just like copying nature across all angles by dialing in the fundamentals that are applicable to you.
Said.
Yeah, that nice and succinct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you asked me the main question, and then I've given you like a one sentence answer, but then you asked me something about melanin or dopamine or addiction, giving you 10 minutes worth of spiel.
Which is what we love. Thank you for that.
This was perfect. Jack, it's my honor to do a formal thank you for you today, and I have a few things. The first one, unfortunately, the audience is not privy to the conversation we had before, but you look like my son, Keith. So thank you for that, because when I went to your Instagram account, I'm like, I had to keep looking. It's like, God, I can't believe how much he looks like my son. So then I dove deeper and deeper. Thank you for your journey through addiction and low testosterone. I know it wasn't probably fun, but the fact that you've been so vulnerable and to share, I think a lot of people are learning from you and won't have to repeat that, hopefully, or they can get out of those states because of all the knowledge that you've gained. Yeah, and the courage and strength it took to overcome those addictions. And yeah, no, you didn't tell us all the details, and that's okay. But I'm sure it was rough. A bunch of like little mantras I picked up along the way, and you just said one is just copy nature. Another one is, I love that. I think we both sighed when you said nature is a factory. You just have to get out in it and avoid endless summer. I'm so proud you said that today, because that one has so many implications for the pregnenolone steal syndrome that many experience in northern climates when they don't get it, embrace winter. You've said your surfaces give you breadcrumbs. I love that. And obviously we go down rabbit holes to figure out what those breadcrumbs can tell us. And then just this dynorphin, this is brand new to me. Andeea obviously knows more about it. So thank you for enlightening us on that, and so much on the addiction piece today. And just like thank you for being a linesman, just because you see the body, like you said, from an electrical standpoint. I think that's part of your gift, is that you are not shying away from learning all that. And like, again, about wide band semiconductors, which most people would run from when they hear that because they have no idea what it is. And just for being so real and teaching us through your lived experience that you don't need a home, you don't need a desk. Like, obviously you have some kind of a desk, but an office, and you can be a rock star in all this gut optimization, health optimization, applied quantum biology. And lastly, your school program, because it's so hard to coach. Like, just myself and Andeea, we both coach as well on the side, and it takes a lot of time and energy. And the fact that you've come up with this way to coach more people, you're going to have a much bigger effect on the world. So thank you just for everything in your time today, Jack. Meant a lot.
Thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate it. It was very sweet. And yeah, it's awesome to be here. I had a really good conversation with you too. Asked some amazing questions, and hopefully we can do it again at some stage.
We would
welcome that.
Yeah, there were so many subjects we didn't even touch that are all ready to go. So we'll set that up.
Perfect.
All right.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for sticking around at the end of this podcast. We want to thank our sponsor, VIVARAYS, who allows for us to get this information to you. They offer top-of-the-line blue blocking glasses, which, as we know, are critical for our health these days for blocking artificial light at night. Over 90% of our time is spent indoors under artificial lights, and this puts us all prone to circadian rhythm disruption. You can use the code QUANTUMHEALTHY for a discount. Link is in the show notes.
Thank you so much for listening to the Quantum Healthy podcast. We hope you found some value in this information. And if you feel inspired, please share it and leave us a 5-star review. This will help us reach so many more people. If you want to connect with Laura, you can find her at laurakissmanwellness.com and Andeea at andeearay.com. Links are below in the show notes. Now, go find some sunlight and embrace your own quantum healthy.